Well, like I mentioned, Christmas is coming up very soon, less than 2 weeks. And I always like watching the sky with Cameron. Cameron is he's into space, all things space. And there's a lot of really cool stuff. And does anybody know what happens on December 21st? We have one star nerd back here. This is great. Nice. That's right. Yep. So, and Cameron, what's it called? The Star of Bethlehem. So on December 21st, Jupiter and Saturn will be exactly in front of each other, in line with the sight of view on Earth. It'll be the brightest object in the sky. It'll only happen on December 21st when they're perfectly aligned. If you look in the sky now, you can see them getting closer, and they're right next to each other like this. And next Monday, December 21st, they'll be stacked exactly on top of each other. It'll be the brightest thing in the sky. It's just for that day and that day only. The last time that took place was over 800 years ago. So it's pretty cool, pretty exciting. Oh, DP, you're going to get kicked out. So I think that's pretty cool. Then another cool space, just another space fact, is that Victor Glover, one of the 4 astronauts who went up to space right now, he's a fellow Church of Christer. He brought his communion set with him. They're spending 6 months in the International Space Station, and Victor Glover tunes into a church service somewhere in Atlanta, and he has communion every Sunday morning about this time. So as we take communion, one of our brothers is up in space orbiting Earth, 250 miles above us, and he'll be taking communion with us as well. So that's another pretty cool fact. I like timing. I like just all the ironies and different things that God does with timing. You know, we talked before about the cliche in God's timing, but it really is a pretty phenomenal thing. God's timing is incredible. Throughout the Gospel of Matthew, Matthew was a mathematician. He was kind of a math nerd, so he coordinated his stories in a mathematical formula in a way to tell a broader story, and just put a lot of focus on the story. And in Matthew's Gospel, we're going to talk about Matthew's calling, whenever Jesus called Matthew, and the controversy that caused. And I think it's important to note that in the first century, there was a lot of heavy stuff going on. I've been talking a lot about this year and the pandemic and the weight that COVID has had on people. It's increased poverty for a lot of people. People are losing jobs. People are losing homes. People are losing loved ones. You know, there are just a lot of compound issues that are taking place with the pandemic of COVID that's going on right now. I want to say, first of all, that it's nothing new. It's nothing unique. Pandemics have been around since the beginning of time. And in the first century, the amount of problems that were stacked, the amount of depression, the amount of poverty, the amount of oppression, abuse was skyrocketed. People were waiting for a Messiah. They were desperate for somebody to swoop in and to save them. And Jesus came at a time when there was a very high anticipation for the Messiah to come. Jewish people, literally, there were communities that would just wait. They would do nothing but wait for a Messiah to come. The Dead Sea Scrolls that we got from Qumran, that was one of those communities. They were waiting in anticipation for a Messiah. I want to read an article about some things that are going on. This was just written in Scientific American Journal. This was written on December 1st, so it's a really recent article. The article was written by Claudia Wallace, and the title of her article is "The Surprising Mental Toll of COVID." The rise in depression and anxiety is even worse than expected, especially among young adults. It's a subtype. I'm going to read a couple sentences from this, and I think it's just important to realize that there's a lot of heaviness going on, especially among young people. She said, "You didn't need a crystal ball to forecast that the COVID-19 pandemic would devastate mental health. Illness or fear of illness, social isolation, economic insecurity, disruption of routine, and loss of loved ones are known risk factors for depression and anxiety. Now studies have confirmed the predictions, but psychologists say the findings also include surprises about the wide extent of mental distress. For example, the way media consumption exasperates it, and how badly it has affected young people. For example, a report from the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, published in August, found a tripling of anxiety symptoms and quadrupling of depression among 5,470 adults surveyed compared with the 2019 sample. Similarly, 2 national representative surveys conducted in April, one by researchers at the Boston University School of Public Health and another at Johns Hopkins University, found that the prevalence of depression symptoms and serious psychological distress were triple the level measured in 2018. Those rates were higher than we've seen after other large-scale traumas like September 11th, Hurricane Katrina, and the Hong Kong unrest, says Catherine Ettman, leader of the BU study. Some of the most affected groups in these studies were people who had pre-existing mental health issues, low-income individuals, people of color, and those close to someone who suffered or died from COVID-19. In Ettman's study, however, the group in the U.S. with the single biggest rise in depression, up 5-fold, was of Asian ethnicity. In an accompanying commentary, psychiatrist Ruth Shim suggested the upsurge could reflect the impact of racism and slurs related to the pandemic's origin in China. So this is kind of troubling to me, that there are so many people who are struggling with depression, with attempted suicide, especially among young people. In the age group of 18, I think it was 18 to 25, it was well over 60% of the people in that group surveyed, just a random survey, over 60% of the people in that age group are suffering with chronic depression, severe depression, crippling depression. And I look at that and I say, how does this tie into the story of Jesus? How does this tie in to this expectation that a Messiah is going to come? Well, first of all, I want to note that the Messiah has already come. That there's already hope, that there's already salvation, that there's already an answer to a lot of the problems that we're facing, that there's healing, that there's redemption, that there's somebody who rescues people. And I talked about this in class a little bit this morning. I didn't use this term, but I'm trying to keep my finger on the pulse of what's going on the churches around the United States. And right now, I'm seeing a lot of Jerry Springer churches. Right? The all-out brawls and fights and people just acting like complete insane jerks to each other in churches. And there's this tension and this building anxiety, and people are starting to fight. And I know personally of several people who've told me that their churches are absolutely splintered to pieces because of infighting. I mentioned in class this morning that I read a post from somebody who I know indirectly, who said, we resigned or were forced out or something of ministry. Every single leader at the church resigned, and this church of, about 300 people is down to 50 and dying. And it's all because of fighting. It's not, that's the irony. It's not because of problems from COVID. They may blame it on that, but it's this infighting. It's people, it's Christians fighting with Christians. And I look at the real problems that are going on. And we mentioned this in class. For those of you who've lost loved ones recently, if you saw Christians fighting with each other in the background while you're grieving over your lost loved one, that would do nothing for your healing. It would do nothing to help. That would only hurt. It would only make you feel more insignificant, more unseen by your fellow brothers and sisters. And so the question is, what did Jesus do about this? How did Jesus respond? I heard just a short thing. It was a podcast that Dave Ramsey was doing with a guest, and I just happened to hear part of it. But Dave Ramsey was talking about this syndrome of, what did he call it? It was like a deranged Trump syndrome and a deranged Biden syndrome. And he said, I'm seeing all these people on both sides who are completely deranged, and both sides are waiting for this messianic type president of the United States who's going to sweep in and just rescue people and make their lives a whole lot better. And he said it's this derangement syndrome because all politicians are corrupt. They're not saviors. Their policies may help us, they may hurt us, but at the end of the day, what a politician does doesn't really affect us that much in our day-to-day lives. And all these people, millions of people, are protesting, and they're glued to the TV, and they can't peel themselves away from the TV, and they're just waiting for this messianic president who's going to sweep in and save our lives. And he said it's this derangement syndrome where they've forgotten who our first love is. They've forgotten that Jesus Christ has already come to save us. And I thought that's kind of an interesting perspective, and I think in a lot of ways he's right. So Matthew, the way that he arranges these stories, I don't even know where to back up and where to start. But, in chapter 8, just kind of going through some of the headings, Jesus cleanses a leper. He just goes in and he just does it. And then there's a centurion. Jesus heals the servant who's laying at home paralyzed. And then the next heading, starting in verse 14, Jesus heals many. Verse 16, that evening they brought him to many who were oppressed by demons. He cast out the spirits with a word and healed all who were sick. Jesus didn't plan. He didn't come up with committees and think about, the demographics of the area and how they were going to execute these plans. He just did it. When he saw people who were suffering, he reached into their lives and he helped them. And then Jesus, the very next story that Matthew tells, Jesus is talking about the cost of following him. If you follow me, there's going to be a great cost. There is no such a thing as somebody sweeping into your life and just making it magically better. Even Jesus. Jesus didn't sweep into people's lives and whisk them back to health and say, okay, now your life is going to be perfect from here on out. Life is tough. And there's a great cost to following Jesus. The very next story, Jesus calms the storm. Very symbolic of Jesus being a peacemaker, of Jesus coming into people's lives, reaching into their lives, and bringing calm when Satan is trying to stir things up and trying to create this chaos. Then he heals these two men with the demons. And then he heals a paralytic. Do you start to see a theme in Matthew? It's this healing over and over and over and over again. And then he calls Matthew, and this is the text that we heard from this morning. As Jesus passed from there, he saw a man called Matthew sitting at the tax booth. And he said to him, "Follow me." And he rose and he followed him. And as Jesus reclined at table in the house, behold, many tax collectors and sinners came and were reclining with Jesus and his disciples. I'm going to stop there for a second. One of the things that, I think it was my mom who said this after Bill Riggs had passed away. She said, one of the things that I appreciated about Bill more than anything else is that he could dine with kings and queens, or he could dine with somebody who nobody else knew, and to Bill it was just the same. He didn't treat anybody any differently regardless of who it was. And that was one of the problems that people had with Jesus. Jesus was a rabbi. He was a teacher. He was revered. He was respected. He wasn't supposed to eat dinner with these lowly people. And Matthew paints this picture where Jesus is reclined at the table. He's chilling out. He's eating with these people. Behold, many tax collectors and sinners came and were reclining with Jesus and his disciples. Let me ask this other question. When is the last time that any of us were intentional about inviting IRS agents and sinners into our home to have dinner with us? Not seeing any hands come to the surface, right? There's this intentionality of Jesus reaching out to people who were rejected by everybody else. Nobody wanted them in their homes. Because, right, IRS agents don't belong in our home. Sinners, people who are defiant. You ever meet people who they're totally defiant about religion? They don't want anything to do with the religion. They mock God, they mock Christians. Any of you jumping up and down, inviting them into your home? Here's my next question. Why not? When the Pharisees saw this, they said to his disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" But when he heard it, that is, when Jesus heard it, he said, "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. Go and learn what this means. I desire mercy and not sacrifice. For I came not to call the righteous, but sinners." And if you look at Jesus' life, who was he reaching out to? Most people I know cannot wait to get a chronically depressed person out of their presence. Some of you who've been chronically depressed know what I'm talking about. You ever see people dying to hang out with you, dying to spend time with you, dying to just be friends with you? It's a lonely thing to be living in an anxious, depressed, oppressed life. And Jesus knew that. He was intentional about reaching into the lives of people who are absolutely broken and who nobody else wanted anything to do with, including the religious leaders. Why is your rabbi, why is your teacher hanging out with sinners and tax collectors? Because those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. Go and learn what this means. I desire mercy and not sacrifice. I feel like a lot of times we focus on sacrifice, which is not a bad thing. Jesus isn't saying, don't make any sacrifices in your life. Clearly, Jesus told his disciples, you're going to sacrifice everything if you're going to follow me. But God first wants us to desire mercy, to be merciful to people, to care for people, to notice people, to help people, to spend time with people, to eat dinner with people, to make people feel human again. As we enter into Christmas and the birth narrative of Jesus, Jesus came for people who are suffering, struggling. That's why we're here as Christians. We're not here to be self-righteous, but to be righteous and to reach people who are struggling. I just want to encourage you this week. Notice people who are struggling. Spend time with them. Invite them into your home. Make yourself uncomfortable. Get out of your comfort zone. and invite people in who need it. If there's anybody this morning who has not taken the step to put Christ on in baptism, or if you have any prayer needs, we would encourage you to come up, or our shepherds will be in the back. Let's all stand and sing together.